Fixing my hair in the camera. He's still bothering me. This funny one. We'll try it this way. Grab the rope. Chapter 13. Behind Ranger, the air was full of screams and cries, splashes and neighs and snorts. But Ranger ran straight for the wagon. He had seen rope earlier when Ma and Pa prepared the wagon for the ferry crossing. Where was it now? Ranger jumped onto the tailgate and climbed between two barrels of flour. He spotted a rope that secured a trunk to the side of the wagon, but when he bit the end and tugged on it, the knots only pulled tighter. There had to be more rope that was strong and long enough and not all tied up to something. Ranger jumped over a wooden trunk and sniffed at the tools that hung along the sides of the wagon. Iron, steel, rust. Finally, he smelled something else. Fiber and sweat, and found a thick coil of rope tucked behind a crate of dried fruit. Ranger clamped his teeth on the rope and tugged as hard as he could. The rope came loose. Ranger took the end in his mouth, leaped from the wagon, and ran for the riverbank. Lizzie held Isaac in her arms and clutched Amelia's hand. Sam was with Ma, practically holding her up as they shouted to Mr. Harrigan over the raging water. Dr. Loring called to the other men for help. Ranger raced up to Sam and thrust the rope at his hands. You brought rope! Sam grabbed it, but Ranger tugged one end back and plunged into the water. With the rope in his teeth, he swam past Mr. Harrigan and Bess toward the place where he'd last seen Pa. The air was wet and full of smells. Horse, sweat, and river plants and fish. Ranger caught the scent of death, too, rising up from the water. There were bodies down there, but Pa was still alive. Ranger could smell him. His scent got stronger as Ranger let the river carry him farther downstream. But there was no sign of Pa in the water, and Ranger was getting tired. The current fought against him. It tugged at his rope and whipped a loop around his legs. He had to kick them free to keep swimming. It got harder and harder to keep his head out of the water so he could see. Ranger knew he couldn't last much longer. He'd have to let go of the rope and swim to shore. He'd have to rest and breathe and try again, but would Pa's alive and fighting smell still be strong then? The rope jerked. Ranger almost lost it, but he clamped his teeth down hard and held on. Ranger felt the water rushing past him. He had run out of rope. Sam held tight to the other end on the bank. Ranger couldn't go any farther without letting go. Ranger struggled to lift his head. He couldn't see Sam or Mr. Harrigan anymore, but he caught a splash in the water just as a dog's length or two away. A hand shot out of the waves, flailing at the air, grabbing at nothing. Then, for a flash of a moment, Ranger saw Pa's terrified face, gasping for breath before he was swept underwater again. Ranger kicked as hard as he could. Back, upstream, he had to battle the current to move even the tiniest bit. The rope scratched his mouth and his tongue. The river slapped at his face, but Ranger swam as hard as he could. Finally, his paw touched something solid, the rough, wet fabric of Pa's shirt. Pa's arm jerked away, and then his head popped out of the water. He coughed. I see the computer said it was stopping, but we're still recording. He coughed, taking in great, desperate gulps of air. His arms flopped and slapped at the river as he tried to stay afloat. The rope! Ranger swam closer. Here, he thought. Take it! In the swift water trading with Dad and Luke, the person had taken the rope right away. Ranger had been watching from the boat. The rope came and the person grabbed it and got saved. But this was different. Training hadn't smelled like this, like fear and panic and coughed up river water. Ranger swam right up beside Pa, kicked him in the shoulder and poked him in the ear with his nose. Finally, Pa's eyes focused on the dog, and then, yes, he lunged at the rope. Sam must have seen Pa's hand close around it because right away the rope pulled tight again. Ranger wasn't sure Pa was strong enough to keep hanging on, so he tried to swim beside him. But Ranger was exhausted, and the current was strong. It was starting to pull him away from Pa, away from the rope and safety. Pa flung an arm around Ranger and held him tight until they finally saw Sam tugging on that rope. Sam cried when he finally saw his Pa. He and Dr. Loring pulled Pa and Ranger all the way into shore until the water was shallow enough for Pa to crawl. Then they splashed out to help him onto dry land. There's Pa grabbing the rope with Ranger. Gosh, Ranger is the hero of this trip. They would have not have all survived without him. Pa coughed up some water, then flopped onto his back and looked up at the sky. Ranger stood in the mud and looked up, too. It felt like something should happen. He'd rescued Pa. Would Luke come and take him home now? But when he heard the words, "Good job," it was Sam's voice, not Luke's. You're such a good boy. Sam put his face close to Ranger's. I love you, dog. Ranger loved Sam, too. But he was still all wet. Ranger shook water onto Sam and everyone laughed. Nothing had ever sounded so good. Later, when all the clothes were hung up to dry, Ma gave Ranger that slab of bacon she'd promised him. You deserve that and more, dog. She patted him on the head and Ranger wolfed down the meat. But Sam wasn't eating. Mom raised her eyebrows. Did all that adventure still away your appetite? Sam shrugged. He'd been quiet all night and Ranger thought he felt warm. Maybe too warm. Uh-oh. Ranger stiffed at Sam's temple and whinnied. Whined. He whined, not whinnied. He whined. Ma squatted down next to Sam and put her hand to his forehead. Ranger felt the air change again. The smell of fear was back even before it crackled out in Mom's voice. Get the medicine chest, Lizzie. He's burning up. Now Sam is sick. This is dramatic. Yeah, we're going on to chapter 14. Crossing the Oregon Trail was not easy for anyone. All right, next chapter is called Fever Dreams.